In this video, I will show you how to use authentication within your Flutter application, and it's gonna be way easier than you might think. Hey everyone, what's up? This is Simon from Galaxies.dev, and today we're building a little Flutter application with state management, so you can have something like a registration page, a login page, and an inside page protected with authentication. We're gonna do all of that in combination with Appwrite, which is also sponsoring this video. So go check it out, appwrite.io. If you don't know it, Appwrite is an open source, secure backend server for web, mobile, and of course Flutter developers. And we can be up and running with Appwrite Cloud in about seconds. And we don't even need to self-host it. But of course, that is also a great way to use Appwrite, and I've done it before with Ionic React, so check out that video. But today we're focusing on Flutter and the authentication part, and I'm going to show you how that works. So first of all, if you want to follow along, link below the video to all the code, because I already prepared some code and we're going to just focus on the bits and pieces that are really relevant to authentication. So in my Appwrite Cloud, I have this new project called Flutter Video, and under authentication, we don't have any users, but by default, email password is already enabled. We can also create a little database, so let's do this right now. I'm gonna call this, it actually doesn't matter, like you can call it whatever you want, dev.dev, because you can have multiple databases in your project, but we're gonna copy that database ID. So I'm gonna use that in my project. I'm gonna show you in a second what I've prepared for you. So I'm gonna put this here under database ID, and then we also need a collection. I'm gonna call this messages. Create that. I'm gonna copy the collection ID in here. I also need my Appwrite project ID. So project ID is usually at the top. It makes it really easy, these buttons. It's so nice. Okay, nice. That's all we need. Additionally, I added under integrations Flutter apps, so you can just click add Flutter app, and then you prepare your package name and name for iOS and Android. So you got these apps listed down here. That's all we need. Now, how did I create my application? I just started it by creating a new Flutter application and passing in part of my bundle identifier, because that makes it a bit easier to figure that out. And then I installed 3 packages, Appwrite, Flutter SVG, and also the provider package. So the provider package is what will help us to work with the state. This is a simple Flutter package, and I'm going to show you how you can use this to show different parts of your application almost automatically. Now, here's my app setup. I got a folder Appwrite, which we will go through in a second. I got a constants file, which now defines my Appwrite project ID, my URL to the cloud, and then also the database and the collection we just set up together. Here you can also see already what we got going. So this is my application, but there are a few bits and pieces missing that we will implement together. But I didn't want to include like building the whole UI. It's actually not that interesting, but I'm gonna of course show you. The most important piece is inside our auth API class. So here we got an authentication status, and we also got a status variable here for our class. And this class now extends the change notifier. So this is the important part. By doing this, we can have a function, or we can call a function called notify listeners. And notify listeners is called in quite a few places here. So let's quickly walk through this class. If we set up this class, we will call an initializer that first of all creates our connection to Appwrite using our settings. This is nothing fancy. Then we're gonna have an automatic function that loads the current user, and we can load the current user from Appwrite by just using account.get. This is enough, because if this fails, so we arrive in the catch block, we're unauthenticated. However, if this succeeds, we can set our status to authenticated. And maybe do we need another notify listener in here? I feel like we need one, because finally, we should definitely tell everybody exactly that we have a loading user. So I'm gonna add this in here as well. Then we got functions which are pretty much just wrapper around the Appwrite SDK. So create user needs an email and password. It will first of all notify the listeners. Why does it notify listeners in the beginning? Probably don't really need that here. Also not here. Oh yeah, I previously had like a loading snippet. However, what we do is if we create a new user, we just return this, and once again, finally, we notify listeners. And you're gonna see this pattern everywhere. If we create an email session, we use the according function from the Appwrite Flutter SDK to create an email session, update our status, and finally notify the listeners. And even for signing in with a provider, which I might show you in the end if we got enough time for this, it is completely the same. We just need to create an OAuth session with a specific provider and then set our user and the status. And if we want to sign out the user, we can just delete our session and finally notify the listeners. There are two more functions what we're going to talk about later to update our preferences, but for now, let's save this. Yeah, let's save the changes and let's head over to the login page. So this is what we currently see on the screen. I think walking through the UI isn't really helpful. There's not a lot going on. So we just have all the text fields connected to an email controller and to a password controller. And we got a bunch of elevated buttons, some just having an icon, some just having text. This one we'll call the sign-in function, and if we want to go to the registration page, we can just use the navigator.push. I haven't set up go route or anything in this example to keep it really as easy as possible. This will trigger the registration page, and you can see this is just another simple page. Also, we already have a button to go to the message page because I want to later show you the concept of roles of users or not authenticated users and how that works with Appwrite. And then we got a few buttons for the social providers like Google, Apple, GitHub, Twitter, because implementing that with Appwrite is actually really, really easy. Now, what we want to implement first of all is on the registration page, the register function. So if I go to the registration page and hit create account, I will first of all show a dialog. That's actually not a big dialog, it's just a loading screen. So if I just hit this, you would see this little loading spinner. And hopefully at some point, because I don't really have anything in there, do we have like a catch block? I don't know if we actually have something. Debug console. We probably could not find the auth provider. Yes! Oh, that's actually a nice error. So what I did is usually if you have a class like our authentication class here, you would create a new instance of that. However, if we create new instances of this class in our application, we're going to have a problem because we're going to have multiple instances and the state will be kind of different. Like every class will have its own authentication state and we're going to run into problems. So in order to overcome that, we are using the provider package from Flutter. And this is how we can implement it. And we're going to use the top level. So we're going to implement it at the main.dart. And we're just going to wrap our application completely in this pattern. So instead of doing it like this, we're going to run app and use change notifier provider. And then we have a create function. So for the create function, we get a context and we're gonna set this to our auth API. Can you format this nicely, please? Thanks. At the import. And then as a child, we're still using my app. Now, what has changed is that our whole application is now wrapped inside this change notifier provider, which is using our auth API. You could actually have an array of different providers so you can listen to different messages or different changes, but this will be enough since we listen to this one. Now, let's do a simple example. I just want to get the value and print out something when it changes. So I'm going to use final value equals, and now I have to access the context dot something. So if I just want to read it, I could use read on the context, but in my case, I want to use watch. Of course, of the type auth API, and I especially want to watch the status. So if we use the right class in here, we can now get directly this value. And we see this is now of the auth status enum. So let's just print this out, print top change, to something like this. Cool. Could not find the correct provider. Let's reload this. There we go. And I'm gonna say, okay, we actually see some logs. Top change uninitialized, and then it changed to unauthenticated. So this is already the first message that shows that our change notification provider works. Because in our auth API, remember, we have this initial function which called load user, and in load user we either set it to authenticated or unauthenticated, and then we notify all listeners. And with this line, we're now notifying everyone who's subscribed to this about the changes. So in my case, I'm getting the initial value uninitialized, and then I'm getting the value unauthenticated. And by doing this pattern, we can of course now easily change and update our application. So what I want to do is, I'm going to replace this now with something like this. So I do have a tabs page that I'm going to import, and I will grab that value. I'm still watching that value, and whenever the value changes, so if the value is uninitialized, I'm going to just show a little progress indicator. Otherwise, I'm going to add a little another if. So I would really like to have a switch case here, but that just doesn't work inside this expression here. In the case we do have something else, I'm going to check if the user is authenticated. Then I will display the tabs page, and otherwise I'm going to display the login page. So if I hit save now, let's refresh the app, we should shortly see a little loading indicator, and then we're on the login page because we're unauthenticated. If I would authenticate now, we should automatically see the log that we're authenticated, and we should be brought to the inside area. So let's give this a try. If I create an account, I'm going to call this simon@galaxies.dev and a super secure password. Let's hit sign up. Okay, top value change, we're still unauthenticated, but I got a little snack bar that my user was created. So this comes from the registration page. And again, it is important on the registration page that I now use from the context our auth API instance. If I wouldn't use this, and this was a problem I had in the beginning, if I just create a new auth API, you would have a new instance of that class, and you want to prevent that by getting the value from your context. So in this case, I'm just getting the auth API class. I'm going to call my create user function, and then I'm showing this little snack bar at the bottom that the user was created. So let's try if the user is actually created. We can check this, by the way, in our auth settings, and there we go. Simon is initially unverified, so you can set up email, SMTP or whatever you want. I'm just gonna say this is now verified. Congratulations, Simon G. And we got this epic user management right out of the box. It's pretty nice. Everything was just enabled for us. And if we're using Flutter, you've probably used Flutter with Firebase. That was one of the first choices that every Flutter developer has. But Appwrite pretty much comes in like second place after Firebase, because this was super easy with cloud as well. Okay, now let's see if we can actually log in the user. That should hopefully change our status once again. So let's see. simon@galaxies.dev. 1, 2, 3. Let's see. Sign in. And voila. We see a new message, top change value to authenticated. And we're in this tabs area. So if you don't see the tabs, it looks like this. Probably I should do this, but then you can't see the logs. I mean, seeing the tabs isn't too important. We just get two screens. That one screen seems to have a problem, but we're gonna fix that. And then we got this one. Actually, I would like to fix that now. That would make life a lot easier. So what is the problem? Username has not been initialized. Okay, yeah, that's true. Let's say string username equals test. Then it should hopefully be initialized. Yeah. Okay, yeah, email is also not initialized. Whatever. Email. Okay, yeah, that was my screen, because I want to show you saving preferences and also loading some collection data in a second. But let's take a step back again and look at this. With just this one line of watching our state from the context and using the change notifier provider, we have pretty much implemented the whole state logic for our application in Flutter, which is very, very powerful. So whenever you update something in your class, call the notify listeners, and everyone who's listening will get the notification, and then you can rebuild your widget tree. It doesn't have to be at the top level. You could have this somewhere later down the line, but we're just gonna do it in here because then it makes it easy to know. Let's see this. If I wanna log out on my account page, I would just hit the sign out function. Again, this would read the context and would just call our sign out function. That would notify the listeners, and as a result, we sign out and our widget tree updates and we're brought back to the login page. And also, if I now reload the app, it wouldn't sign me in. But if I do simon@galaxies.dev, if I sign in, I'm inside and I now reload my application, it would automatically bring me back to the inside area because initially we're uninitialized, but then we get the user, we get our session, and Appwrite SDK handles this, and we are authenticated. So let's move on to another screen, which is the account screen. So when you're using Appwrite, every user has some data. For example, down here we have user preferences and we can add different keys or values to it. And in fact, I already prepared this initially here. So we got a get user preferences, which will return all of our preferences, or we can update the preferences. In my case, I just want to set the bio to something. So let's try and build this. For this, we're going to go to our account page. And first of all, we're going to load our preferences. Now, how do we load the preferences? Actually, I'm going to set this to some values. So bio, this was manually added. So I can do this just in here if I want to. Then we're going to say, how do we load our preferences? Well, first of all, we're going to access the auth API again from our context. And then I'm going to try and read the email, because this is stored after we load the user data. And we can also load the username by using appwrite.username. Actually, I don't want to use tests. So once we got this, we can even remove what we had before. Hello, what's your problem? String, okay, yeah, we have this. So I'm gonna make this another late string, which is initialized a bit later, and I don't want this initial value. So now we can do it like this. And as a result, if I now load, welcome back, Simon G, and my email is here. But this information is just stored in the user session and the user object. We want to get the preferences. So I'm gonna say Appwrite get user preferences. And I can use then exactly. So then I will get back some value. And what I'm going to do is if the value.data is not empty, because this could definitely be the case initially, I'm going to set my bio text controller text to the value of the bio. So let's see if this loads our data. There we go. Nice, this was manually added. So this shows how easily we can use the user preferences. I could change this to change something. Of course, I don't have the a real-time enabled, but you can use real-time with Appwrite as well. That's no problem. But now I got my saved, my changed bio. But of course, I also want to save my bio. So let's use it again. Final auth API, getting the API from the context. In fact, I could use probably a new instance. That wouldn't be a problem, but I mean, it's a bit better like this. Then I'm going to call Appwrite update preferences, and I want to write the bio exactly and use, oh yeah, of course, need bio, and then the value of our text controller. And if we want to, we can also add a little snack bar after this that should show that we updated. So let's say this is pretty cool. Hit save, updated, and let's check out in here. So Simon G, and this is pretty cool. So this is really easy to work with the user preferences. Once you got a user, it's really that easy. You can put in pretty much everything you want in here, and then you can access it by the key like we did in here, which makes it really easy to store something specific about the user. You could have any kind of information you capture during the sign up of a user attached to the user preferences, and then you can easily grab that information later from a user. Now, I want to show you one more thing, because this is also related to state management and authentication. And this is about the roles. If you check out your database in Appwrite, I'm gonna go to my messages collection. You're gonna see that first of all, we probably need some attributes, right? So let's get some attributes. We're gonna have a text. That will be a string. Size, I don't know, 120. It should be a short string. Text is definitely required. Then we're gonna add an attribute user ID. This will, I think, also be a string. What's the size? I actually don't know. Let's use 50. And we make that one required as well. And then I want to also add the date using datetime. Default value sounds good. Doesn't really have to be required. I think that should be enough. Then we head over to settings and we update the permissions. So what I want to do is I want to allow anyone to read the data, and I want to allow all users to create, read, update, and delete. So we can have really granular permissions here with Appwrite, which makes it a really great choice if you have complex role models and permission models for your application. Basically, the role any is, if I just enter the application, I would have the role any. You can have a call about that. Then we have all guests, so you can actually create an anonymous session. In that case, you would be a guest, and in that case, you could have probably different rules. You would maybe allowed to be like add a few things here and there, read some other data that not everyone is allowed, but you can't update or delete anything. And if I hit all users, of course, that is only for signed in users. And I could also have teams set up, or I could have specific users like an admin user or even custom permissions. So let's see how this works in action. We're gonna go to the messages page, and on the messages page, we now wanna load the messages. So in the beginning, we're gonna first of all grab our authentication status so we actually know whether the user is authenticated or not. By this time, there's nothing in it. So let's change this to final auth API. And again, getting it from the context and then setting our auth status to appwrite.status. We could probably have done this in one line. That would have been a bit easier. Anyway, to load the messages, we can now use our database API. I created this in a separate file simply to have it split up between the authentication and database, and we also don't really need a change notifier in this case. And here we just wrap the SDK from Appwrite. So if we want to list all documents of a collection, we would get back all the information, and that's why I initially added the constants. We have an add message function which will create a document with a unique ID and the current user information. Then we have delete message as well, which would delete a message. So let's see, we don't really have any kind of permission here in our application because this will be all handled by Appwrite at that level. However, if we now want to load a message, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna grab all the messages from the database and we're gonna set our state to the new messages. In our case, I shouldn't have any message yet. That's not a problem. So let's also implement add message. For add message, we call our database function with the content of our message controller. Where's our message controller, by the way? There it is. Yeah, the message controller is, by the way, dependent on the authentication status. So once again, I'm using it this time a bit different because in this inside area, we don't really need to watch the context as it can't really change on this page right now. If you would have that, of course, you could watch it and then use our change notifier provider again. But in this case, I just want to read it initially when this page loads and check if the user is authenticated and then display this page, which would allow us to add a message. And I should now be able to actually add this message. So this is a test. I'm gonna send this and it immediately appears here because we're also calling load messages. This will update our state, and I have a little list here in that view which goes through all the messages and displays little cards with them. So I'm authenticated and I'm allowed to do all of this. I'm also allowed to delete messages, which would once again just call our class to delete the messages. So let's add another test. And I could also remove that. And of course, inside my database, I should now see the documents, just like we created them, with the text, the user ID, and the date. So cool. Love it. Now the interesting part happens. What if a user accesses this page and the user is a guest or not even anything? Let's check. We go to the outside area. So at this point, I'm not authenticated anymore. And if I now go to read messages as guests, this is actually on the login page, just navigating straight to the messages page. It's implemented down here right below the messages page, the registration page. It will just open that page. So let's see what happens. Read messages as guest. I can still see the data. What happens if I want to delete something? Ooh, the current user is not authorized to perform the requested action. And this now comes basically straight from Appwrite. We're not handling any kind of permissions here in the app. We're just trying to delete a message, but if we get an exception, we show that exception. And this exception happens because we have set up the rules here that any can only read. I could actually remove that rule as well. So if I remove that read. So any has no rules at all. Let's go to read messages. No more data. Everything is hidden. And this immediately works. This is kind of like one of my favorite features. So just going back. I could now even allow any to delete this. Let's update this. And then that user would actually be allowed to do this. And I'm gonna update this again. And not allowed anymore. This is so fun. I could just play around with the permission and update stuff. And that would be enough for me. Finally, do we have time for? Yeah, let's quickly do this. There's one more thing that I wanted to show you, and that is we've seen authentication with email and password, but you can actually really easily implement social or OAuth for different providers here. So let's say for GitHub, I want to enable this. I would just have to add an ID. Now, I've created something already in GitHub before. This is under settings, developer settings, and OAuth apps. So I got my app here created. Can I just copy this? Also, to complete setup, redirect to GitHub. Okay, I need the app ID. App ID should be, I think it's the client ID. The app secret, let's create a new secret. And I'm adding it here, and I'm gonna update this. Now, it is enabled here, but we also need to set the right authorization callback URL. All right, I completely trolled myself. I just have to scroll down on this page and there's a redirect URI. So this is the one right here, or actually it's probably not, so I'm gonna update it. And I'm gonna update my application. And let's see, if I now try and use GitHub authentication, it is really just one line. So what we're calling here on the login page is sign in with provider GitHub. So really just using the string GitHub. And this tries to use the sign in with provider from our little class here. And again, this is using the Appwrite SDK. So let's try, and voila. It brings up the GitHub sign-in. I already went through this before. You can just enter your credentials and then you are immediately signed in. So let's go through this. And immediately after going through the sign up, I'm right in here. And I can also now check my users and I should see a second user. Simon users, that looks strange. Yeah, no reply, GitHub, verified automatically. And we do have our second user. So setting up OAuth is really that easy. You just go to the different providers, you enable them, you grab the settings. Usually it's just about setting some keys. I mean, for Apple, it's a bit more complicated to generate these keys, but for most other providers, it is pretty straightforward. And then you have authentication in your Flutter app. We got the preferences, we got the different roles. And if you want to check out this code, link below the video, you can also find a written version there, but probably going to check out the GitHub repository, which contains all the code which I quickly walked you through in this tutorial. So if you want authentication in your Flutter application, you can do this right at the top level with a change Notifier provider. This is really everything you need to rebuild your widgets, rebuild your tree. And as you've seen, we just need to notify all listeners when our authentication authentication state changes, which is super easy to implement with Appwrite given the Flutter SDK of Appwrite, and now also Appwrite Cloud, which allows you to pretty much instantly set up an Appwrite instance in the cloud that you can connect to your Flutter application. Also, of course, check out appwrite.io. Thanks again for sponsoring, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and the like button so you get notified about the upcoming videos, no matter if it's Flutter, React Native, Capacitor, or anything else, which we can actually all connect to Appwrite. So enjoy this app. If you got any questions, let me know in the comments, and I will catch you next time. So until then, happy coding, Simon.